Welcome back. You're still onto the economy today, and today we're looking at the relationship between the Nigerian government and also the U.S. government. That's looking at the relationship between the two countries. It could be bilateral, it is called a trade relationship based on the economy of both countries. I have with me in the studio to discuss this and other matters relating to this issue, Wofai Samuel. She's the Director of Communications and Government Relations on Advocacy of the Nigerian American Chamber of Commerce. So, hello.
Thank you very much.
I would say quite young and
Quite
with
young.
a very big,
Thank you.
portfolio.
Thank you. Thank
Well,
you very much.
now let's look at the relation. Now, when I was going through my research, I found out that relationship has been since the 1960s. You know, since the 1960s, Nigeria and the U.S. have been in partnership, on advocacy, on a lot of things, policy, a lot of other things. But then let us know, how do you see that relationship? Has it fostered to a positive line? Or are there some hitches here and there?
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction and acknowledging the fact that the U.S.-Nigeria relationship had existed way before 1960, specific to 1960. 1960 was when Nigeria got independence. And like you mentioned, the United States happens to be one of the largest and oldest trading partners with Nigeria. So I would say by all means, every relationship has its hitches, but on an average, Nigeria-U.S. relationship is doing well. U.S. happens to be one of the countries that has the best diplomatic relationships with Nigeria. The United States has supported Nigeria from time immemorial, from the areas of health to security to agriculture to grants and donations, to name a few. The United States have always supported the U.S. We do know that Her Excellency, the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, was in several countries across the continent of Africa, reinstating her commitment to work with some of these countries. And during the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit that was held in Washington, D.C. last year, she restated her commitment to work with Nigeria. Now, if you look at the previous election we just had some months back, top stakeholders in the U.S. made several videos reiterating their commitment to working with Nigeria. Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa, the most black populous country on earth. So trading, working with a country like the United States is not out of place. To an extent, they're not doing us a favor. It's compulsory that they trade with us. It's compulsory that they work with us. So I'd say that over time, our relationship with the U.S. has improved, and it keeps improving. More donations from the U.S., more, what's it called now? More bilateral trade relationships enhanced between Nigeria and the United States, and we look forward to seeing more.
Now, are there any focuses? Now you mentioned all the trade, security, agriculture. There are a lot of things that is lacking in the country, Nigeria now, because the United States is a bigger nation, when it comes to size, it comes to the economy, it comes to the massiveness of their wealth and the rest of them, compared to a nation like Nigeria, even though it is the largest black nation on planet Earth and also the largest population in Africa. So what focuses do you think the United States is focusing on and should focus on?
Thank you very much. So at certain various interviews, I've always emphasized on power and energy. No country in the world would be able to flourish in the dark. The president of African Development Bank, Kumi Addition, has said that over and over again. So part of what Nigeria lacks is stable electricity and power supply. There's room for investments in that sector. So we want to see more partnerships with the USAID, more partnerships with Prosper Africa, more partnerships with US-based organizations and firms coming to invest in Nigeria, especially in the power and energy sector. So we've seen the oil and gas, it's been a very robust relationship between Nigeria and the US in terms of the oil and gas.
Yes.
Lots of US oil companies are doing well in Nigeria, although some of them had left in the past few years owing to security concerns, the FX market, to name a few of that. But the power and energy sector, we've not seen so much of US inputs or so much of US impact. So we'd like to see the US playing in that field, power and energy, because at the end of the day, if Nigeria's trade and economy is enhanced, it automatically rubs off on Africa. excluding power and energy, agriculture is another sector I'd like to see more investment. So we are gradually moving from subsistence farming to mechanized farming, where we get to produce more goods, more products, more services. But at the end of the day, if you produce all of these goods and products and services and you do not have proper storage, excuse me, everything goes to waste if you don't have proper storage. So when you look at countries like India, you look at some other countries in Asia that in the past were not very big on agriculture. How are they able to solve the agricultural concerns and issues? You know, stability in power, they produced more, they were able to store, and because they were able to store, so many other countries were able to buy from them. So I think the power and energy sector is where I would advocate for investments from any country in the world to come in. And then infrastructure. Infrastructure is one thing Nigeria is lacking. So when you talk about infrastructure, you're talking about good roads, you're talking about the aviation sector. Infrastructure is movement, logistics, goods and services. So
yes. Now, I want to say this. You said so much good things about, you know, this partnership, and if it goes forward, this is what it's going to result in. I know the United States keeps on giving the Nigeria grants, you know, loans and the rest of them for investments and probably for improvements and development of the economy. But then there's a challenge in governance. Remember that this is a first world country dealing with either an underdeveloped country or a third world country. So how do you, when it comes to, say, sustenance of development in this third world country, you know, and maintenance of governance, and also being able to push, or rather to stamp a feet down on development, because we are bringing in investment from the United States into the country. What should happen in this state now? What is the chamber itself doing to help mitigating the fact that you want to make sure that, okay, when investment comes from this nation into this country, it is thoroughly used for its purpose?
Thank you very much. Checks and balances are very necessary, especially for developing countries like Nigeria, like you mentioned. Part of the reasons why investors are scared to come to developing countries is the fact that, you know, there are no, so to speak, rule of law, law and order, rules and regulations, contract terms and conditions that should be adhered to and followed. We are looking forward to this administration changing a lot of norms that the global society and the global communities see as abnormal. We are very hopeful, we are optimistic. Now, we are a Chamber of Commerce. A Chamber of Commerce has no business making rules and regulations. We only advocate for the right policies, just like I'm speaking on TV now, advocating for the right policies, advocating for, you know, solutions to challenges that we face. Now, as a Chamber of Commerce, we are very big on advocacy. Our advocacy drive is what defines us. So we take every opportunity to put together conversations, meetings, and fora where we discuss challenges that Nigeria is saddled with and the international community to an extent are uncomfortable with. So we talk about these things. We bring up professionals and senior stakeholders who are in this field to come analyze these challenges and prefer solutions. Sometimes we put together white papers and we send them to government agencies, we send them to government, hoping that government would listen, government would see our recommendations and heed to them. But at the end of the day, if the government or the people who are the policy makers decide to throw away these white papers, throw away this what's it called now, this research and findings, there's very little we can do. So at the end of the day, chambers of commerce anywhere in the world has to work hand in hand with the government. But like any other chamber of commerce in the world, we are very big on advocacy for Nigeria and the United States. We want more people to come in from the United States to do business in Nigeria. Those who are already doing business in Nigeria, we want to strengthen their businesses. And then people who want to travel to the United States, we want to be an avenue through which you can get information to the United States easily. We want to be an avenue through which you can meet with stakeholders who are involved in your sector, who are involved in what you do. We want to be, you know, that what's the word now? That crossroad. We want to be we want to stand in the gap. So that way, you're not experiencing as difficult. You're not experiencing as much difficulties as a person who is not affiliated with any chamber of commerce, a person who is not connected to the market at all. So in very simple terms, in respect to what the chamber is doing is in the areas of advocacy. So we try as much as we can to advocate for favorable business policies for our members. Our members are mostly SMEs, not just our members, the larger society and the larger community. And like I mentioned, the US, up until date, happens to be one of the strongest trading partners with Nigeria. Nigeria has imported so much. I don't have the numbers. I'm not a macroeconomist. Nigeria has imported so much into the US in the last 5 years, and the US has also exported into Nigeria a whole lot. Excluding United Kingdom, China, USA happens to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, trading partners of Nigeria.
I wanted to come to you to that, but we'll go for a very short break now. I'll be right back to ask this very young lady some more interesting questions. Welcome back. We're still on the economy today, discussing the economy, discussing this issue, the relationship between the Nigerian government and the U.S. government. That's from the perspective of the Chamber of Commerce of both countries. So I want to come to the challenges now. There are a lot of challenges facing the country and facing that relationship, you know. Over the years, we've had issues. In fact, currently you have issues of Africa emancipation. You know, Africa needs to take up the challenge now to be at the forefront of everything. Africa needs to treat with the West like partners and not like the godfather to the small boy, you know, and all that. So what do you say to this? You know, you've talked about there are a lot of imports going to the United States from Nigeria. There's a lot of also imports, exports also coming from the United States into Nigeria. So how do you build that relationship? Should it be a relationship of same equal or the bigger person to a smaller person? Okay,
so in that regard, I think the United States have been fair enough. So over and again, the current President Joe Biden has said, you know, we are not giving aid to Africa. Africa are our partners. We want to trade with Africa. And when you talk about Africa, I keep emphasizing Nigeria because we're the most populous. Now, we are trying to trade with each other, thanks to the African Export-Import Bank for what they are doing, ensuring that countries trade more within themselves. But what are we doing in Nigeria? We work hand in hand with the NIPC, the Nigerian Investment Promotions Commission. Recently, we had a conversation and the acting CEO was present at that meeting. NIPC has an act, I'll say a rule and regulation that ensures that every product every good and service you're producing measures a particular standard. Now, the standard is a standard that is acceptable by the African Free Trade Continental Area. So Nigerian government has put that together using the NIPC Act. That's one way to ensure that we trade with ourselves and ensure that the goods and services we're sending out of Nigeria are, you know, at par and at standard, at par and are up to measurable standards of what is obtainable abroad. Now, away from that, what's it called now? The volume of trade between Nigeria and the United States, like I mentioned, in the last few years has increased tremendously. Excuse me. Part of what the Chamber of Commerce is doing right now is fostering collaborative relationships with other chambers of commerce in the United States, other trade organizations in the United States. Recently, we were interviewed by the Center for International Private Enterprise, that's CIPA. CIPA are one of the strongest drivers for trade investments as it has to do with policy and the economy. You know, democracy, policy, and the economy. Where there's good governance, trade and investments thrive more, because at the end of the day, you're talking about clearing your debt. You're talking about having more investors in your country. You can only have investors in your country when they feel to a reasonable extent that they are comfortable with your policies. I don't want to take my money to a country where they have, you know, policy somersaults, your FX is never stable, you know, there's insecurity and so on and so forth. So we've been able to foster a strong collaborative relationship with the CIPE. Recently, we were in the US, where we attended the Select USA Summit. Select USA Summit was about is strictly for people who want to invest in the US. And we met a whole lot of people who are willing to invest in Nigeria. All we need to do is now guide these people, provide them with the right information. That information is power. Part of the reasons why US happens to be one of the strongest nations, if not the strongest nation on earth, is the fact that they are privy to a lot of information. So when you have information, it guides what you do. US is big on intelligence. So what we do as a chamber is, you know, embark on all of this research, make our findings, create surveys, and then advise stakeholders, senior officials, organizations, and enterprises who are seeking to come to Nigeria. Again, we're not there when it comes to Nigeria, America, but we are not where we used to be, and we're getting better. At some point in time, there was a slack so to speak. And so you see a lot of Chinese organizations giving out loans, giving out aids to, so to speak, to Nigeria. No, it wasn't like the US was sleeping. No, they weren't. At some point, they just decided to take a break. But now they are fully back. We've seen the visits from Anthony Blinken. We've seen the visits from Her Excellency Kamala Harris to various African countries. They are back to take up the relationship they once shared with countries in Africa. So in summary, what I would say is, we are focused on building the U.S.-Nigeria partnerships, and there could be no other country to trade with other than the U.S. U.S. has the largest consumer markets in the world. So, if you're into consumer goods, which other country would you prefer? Speaking about the U.S. For real estate, the expense of land in the U.S., just like Canada and so many other countries, is amazing. We were in the U.S., and like I mentioned, it was amazing to see the expanse of land that are unused. So for people who are willing to invest in real estate is also one sector in the U.S. that you could, comfortably invest in. Then the environment, U.S. is big on environment. They advocate for climate change, they advocate for water. We would get there, but I think the environment is also a very viable sector for investment. So my take would be consumer markets, real estate, environment, investing in the U.S. And then for Nigeria, infrastructure, power and energy. Those are like the real critical sectors that Nigeria is lacking in: infrastructure, power, and energy. Once we're able to fix this, I'm sure we'd get more investment.
So these are the challenges that you see, that could actually hamper development, that relationship between the two countries.
The challenges are based on policies. So in very simple terms, I'll streamline it to three. Number one, your policies. What are your policies? What are you saying to foreign direct investors, people who are coming from US? Are they comfortable with the policies that you're making? Are these policies, whether you're talking about visa policies, whether you're talking about security policies, whether you're talking about policies that are relatable to the economy, effects, what are the policies your government is putting in place? So policies are a very critical factor that could hinder investment in any society. Nigeria is not exempted. Then excluding policies, security concerns. Everybody wants to, invest in a society, like I mentioned initially, where they're sure that to an extent, their goods, their services, their enterprises and organizations are safe and secure. You don't want to send your expatriates or your expats from the US to Nigeria, and at the end of the day, they're running helter-skelter because they feel threatened. So when I mention insecurity, people are, automatically thinking about Boko Haram. It's not just about Boko Haram. It's not just about the terrorists. It's about basically just ensuring that it's about simple things like you feel safe walking around your environment and you're not threatened. The security situation in Nigeria it's getting better over time, but we can do more. Now, away from security, away from policies, I'll talk about your macroeconomic index. So I want to invest in your economy. How much am I putting in and how much am I getting out? Now, the president and this present government is trying to unify the exchange rate. That's a step in the right direction. So you're not giving Mr. A different exchange rate and giving Mr. B a different exchange rate. So Mr. A would invest and get more money, whereas Mr. B is investing on a higher exchange rate and getting lower. So now everybody's playing on the same level field. That's a good signal you're sending to international investors. So these are some of the main challenges we've had in the past. Policy somersaults, the macroeconomics index, that's the FX market, what the FX market is saying, and then finally security concerns. If all of these three subject matters can be addressed by the current administration, I'm sure there will be loads of foreign direct investments into Nigeria. And then Nigeria needs to respect sanctity of contracts. So you put together a contract with a country as coordinated as the US. US is big on papers. So you put together these contracts and you don't follow through all the nooks and crannies, the I's and T's, every single thing on that contract from top to bottom. You feel like you can, cut corners, cross roads. You don't adhere to the agreements that you had from the beginning. We should try as much as we can to desist from this. So if we can put our policies together, address some security concerns, address the FX market, and then ensure that we stick to the sanctity of contracts, I'm sure we'll be able to get more foreign direct investments into Nigeria. Wow,
I wanted to ask you those questions, but you answered a lot of questions, that I wanted to ask. But let me just say in a final one, in a minute, if you can just tell us what exactly, how do you describe the the Nigerian-US relationship going forward?
Thank you very much. So the Nigerian-US relationship is a very dynamic, spontaneous, and productive one. Like I mentioned, the US is the envy of so many countries in the world. Which country would you rather trade or do business with, excluding the US? US has supported Nigeria a great deal. I would be doing myself a great disservice if I do not talk about even the grants and the opportunities, the trainings. Away from the Nigerian American Chamber of Commerce, I also belong to an organization called the United States Government Exchange Alumni Association. I'm the publicity secretary. to that association that houses people who have gone to the US and returned from trainings. So the US offers all of these myriads of opportunities to Nigerians. I don't know if other countries do, and if they do, I don't know if they do as much as we do. But it is on record that US happens to be one of the countries who have given the most grants, the most aids, and the most exchange opportunities to Nigerians. So I'll describe our relationship again, like I mentioned, as spontaneous, dynamic, and highly productive.